Two pink lines. In a luxury Seoul penthouse, Betty Monroe realizes the worst day of her life has just begun. She is pregnant, and the man responsible already knew. He admits it calmly. He planned it, because she was leaving. In one night, her freedom disappears, and she is taken from the city to a guarded island fortress, where love feels like control and protection feels like prison. Then the world explodes. Gunfire tears through the island. She watches the man who trapped her turn into a ruthless protector, bleeding but unyielding, willing to burn the world to keep her alive. Just when escape seems possible, another truth detonates everything. Her past, her father, and the criminal empire waiting for her in Los Angeles. Now hunted across continents, carrying a child born from obsession and choice colliding, Betty must decide, is this man her captor, or the only one willing to give up everything to save her? And when the past finally comes calling, will love be enough to end the war, or will it start the final one? If you want to see how a stolen choice turns into a hard-won love, how a monster learns to become a man, and what happens when freedom has a price no one expected, stay with this story, because what happens next changes everything. Welcome to Afrok Drama Tales, where love is never simple, loyalty is tested, and every twist hits harder than you expect. If you are ready for intense romance, high-stakes drama, and stories that keep you glued till the very end, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And do not watch alone. Share this with a friend who loves dramatic love stories, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and whose side you are on. The bathroom was too quiet. Betty Monroe's hands trembled as she stared at the pregnancy test resting on the marble counter. Two pink lines stared back at her, unmistakable and terrifying. She pressed her palm against her flat stomach, trying to process what this meant. A baby. Kang Joon-hyuk's baby. The penthouse stretched around her in silent luxury, all glass and steel overlooking the Han River. Seoul glittered below like scattered diamonds, beautiful and indifferent to the way her world was splintering. Her consulting contract ended in 12 days. Her flight to Los Angeles was booked. She had been counting down to freedom. Now freedom felt like something slipping through her fingers. Betty took 3 more tests, hoping somehow the first had been wrong. They all showed the same result. Pregnant. At least 8 weeks, maybe more. The timeline made her stomach churn, because 8 weeks ago, things had been different between them. Easier. Before she realized how tightly Joon-hyuk's control wrapped around every aspect of her life. She walked into the bedroom and found him standing by the window, still dressed in his black suit despite the late hour. He must have heard her moving around, because he turned, his dark eyes finding hers immediately. "You know," Betty said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Joon-hyuk's expression didn't change. No surprise flickered across his features. No shock at the news she hadn't yet spoken. Yes. That single word confirmed everything. Betty's legs felt weak. She sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at him. How long? 5 weeks. Joon-hyuk moved toward her with that predatory grace she had once found attractive. Now it just made her feel cornered. "I stopped using protection 5 weeks ago." The admission landed like a slap. Betty's hands curled into fists against her thighs. "You did this on purpose." "Yes." "Why?" The question came out broken. Joon-hyuk knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. His hands rested on her knees, warm and possessive. "Because you were leaving. Because you made plans to go back to your life in America and pretend these 6 months never happened. Because I needed you to stay. So you trapped me." Betty's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You took away my choice and tied me to you permanently. I gave us a future." Joon-hyuk's fingers tightened slightly. "Our child will bind us in ways a contract or feelings never could. This is permanent, Betty. as it should be. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to run, but her body felt frozen, shock giving way to a cold, creeping dread. You had no right. I had every right. You belong with me. His voice carried absolute conviction. You have known this for months, even if you refuse to admit it. Betty shook her head, tears burning her eyes. This isn't love. This is ownership. Call it what you want. The result is the same. You are carrying my child, and you will stay in Seoul where I can protect you both. I don't want your protection. I want my freedom. Joon-hyuk's expression hardened. He stood looking down at her with those unreadable eyes. Freedom is an illusion, Betty. You came into my world. You accepted my hospitality, my gifts, my bed. Did you truly believe there would be no consequences? The words sent ice through her veins because he was right about one thing. She had known who Kang Joon-hyuk was when she took the consulting position his company offered, had known about the rumors, the whispers of criminal connections, the violence that lurked beneath his polished exterior. She had thought she could navigate his world and leave unscathed. She had been wrong. I want to go home, she whispered. You are home. Joon-hyuk's voice softened slightly. This penthouse, this city, me. This is your home now. The sooner you accept that, the easier everything will be. He left her sitting on the bed, closing the door quietly behind him. Betty curled onto her side, her hand pressed against her stomach where a life was growing. A life she hadn't chosen, but would be responsible for. A life that bound her to a man who saw her as a possession rather than a partner. The tears came, then hot and bitter. She cried for the future she had lost, for the choice that had been stolen, for the impossible situation she now faced. The next morning, Betty woke to find a doctor waiting in the living room. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Joon-hyuk stood nearby, his expression expectant. This is Dr. Kim, he said. She will examine you and confirm the pregnancy. Betty wanted to refuse, but what was the point? The test had been clear. So she followed Dr. Kim into the guest room that had been converted into a makeshift examination space. The doctor was thorough and gentle, asking questions about Betty's health history, her cycle, any symptoms she had noticed. You are approximately 9 weeks pregnant, Dr. Kim said finally, reviewing her notes. Everything appears normal. I will schedule regular checkups and provide you with prenatal vitamins. 9 weeks. Betty did the math in her head. That night after they returned from Jeju Island, when Joon-hyuk had been particularly attentive and she had felt so connected to him, that was when this had started. When Dr. Kim left, Betty found Joon-hyuk in his office. He was on the phone speaking rapid Korean, but he ended the call when he saw her in the doorway. 9 weeks, Betty said flatly. You planned this the entire weekend in Jeju, didn't you? Joon-hyuk set his phone down. I saw an opportunity and took it. That is what I do, Betty. I see what I want and I make it mine. I am not a business acquisition. No. You are far more valuable. He stood and moved around the desk. A business can be sold or dissolved. A child cannot. Our connection is now permanent. Betty's hands clenched at her sides. What if I leave anyway? What if I get on that plane in 12 days and never come back? Something dangerous flashed in Joon-hyuk's eyes. Then I will follow you to Los Angeles. I will find you wherever you go, and I will bring you back. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Do not test me on this, Betty. You will not like the results. So I'm a prisoner. You are protected. There is a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Joon-hyuk's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might argue. Instead, he picked up his phone and made another call. Betty listened to him speak in Korean, catching only a few words. When he finished, he looked at her with grim determination. We are leaving Seoul. Today. I am moving you somewhere safer. Alarm spiked through Betty's chest. What? Why? Because news of your pregnancy will spread quickly in my circles. Because pregnancies make women vulnerable. Because my enemies will see you and our child as leverage against me. Joon-hyuk's expression was hard. I will not give them that opportunity. Where are we going? Somewhere remote. Somewhere I can control every variable. He moved past her toward the bedroom. Pack what you need. We leave in 2 hours. Betty stood frozen in his office, her mind racing. This was escalating faster than she could process. First the pregnancy, now relocation to some unknown place. Every choice was being stripped away, every path to freedom closing. She thought about running, just walking out of the penthouse and disappearing into Seoul's crowded streets. But Joon-hyuk's people were everywhere. His security team monitored every exit. And even if she made it out, where would she go? She had no allies in Korea, limited money of her own, and a pregnancy that made her increasingly dependent. The trap had closed completely. 2 hours later, Betty sat in the back of a black SUV as it navigated through Seoul's traffic. Joon-hyuk sat beside her, his attention on his phone as he conducted business. 2 more vehicles flanked them, filled with security personnel whose faces she was learning to recognize. They drove for hours, leaving the city behind for rural highways that wound through mountains. Betty watched the landscape change, from urban sprawl to small villages to dense forest. With each mile, she felt Seoul's relative safety slipping away. They reached the coast as the sun began to set. A private dock waited, where a sleek boat was moored. Joon-hyuk helped her aboard, his hand firm on her elbow. The boat cut through dark water as night fell completely, heading toward an island Betty could barely see through the gathering darkness. When they finally docked, Betty stood on shaky legs and looked at what would be her new prison. The island rose from the sea like a fortress, covered in forest with a single sprawling structure visible at its center. Lights blazed from every window, illuminating the modern architecture that somehow managed to look both beautiful and threatening. "Welcome home," Joon-hyuk said quietly. Betty's throat tightened. This wasn't home. This was exile. But she let him guide her up the path toward the house, too exhausted to fight anymore. The interior was stunning in its minimalism. Clean lines, expensive furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sea. A staff member appeared to show Betty to her room, a suite in the east wing with its own bathroom and sitting area. "Your clothes will arrive tomorrow," Joon-hyuk said from the doorway, "along with everything else you might need. If there is something you want, tell the staff. They will arrange it. What I want is to leave. That is the one thing I cannot give you." He stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I know you hate me right now. That is acceptable. But you will be safe here, and our child will grow healthy. That is all that matters." Betty jerked away from his touch. "Don't pretend this is about the baby. This is about control, about making sure I can never escape you." "Yes," Joon-hyuk agreed simply. "It is about all of those things. I never claimed to be a good man, Betty. Only an honest one." He left her alone in the beautiful room that felt like a cage. Betty sank onto the bed and stared at the dark water visible through the windows. She was truly trapped now, on an island, pregnant, surrounded by Joon-hyuk's people with no way to contact the outside world. The weight of it crushed the air from her lungs. Days blurred together in the fortress on the island. Betty established a routine out of necessity, needing structure to keep from falling apart. She woke early and walked the perimeter of the property, always accompanied by security guards who maintained a respectful distance. She ate meals that appeared at regular intervals, prepared by a kitchen staff she rarely saw. She read books from the extensive library and tried not to think about her life in Los Angeles that was slipping further away with each passing day. Joon-hyuk appeared every evening for dinner. They ate on the terrace when weather permitted, the sea breeze carrying salt and the cries of gulls. He asked about her health, her appetite, whether she needed anything. The conversations were polite and utterly surreal. "You cannot keep me here forever," Betty said one night, breaking the careful peace between them. Joon-hyuk set down his wine glass. He never drank much, always maintaining control. "I can keep you here as long as necessary." "And how long is that?" "Until the threats are eliminated, until you are too pregnant to travel easily, until you accept that this is your life now." He studied her face in the candlelight. "Pick whichever timeline you prefer." Betty's appetite vanished. She pushed her plate away. "I will never accept this. Never stop looking for a way out." "I know." Joon-hyuk's expression was unreadable. "Your stubbornness is part of what drew me to you. But Betty, you need to understand something. The moment you became pregnant with my child, you became the most valuable and vulnerable thing in my world. My enemies would pay fortunes to get their hands on you, would do unspeakable things to hurt me through you. Then let me go. If I'm such a liability, why keep me? Because losing you would be worse than any threat." The words came out quiet, but absolute. "I would burn entire districts to keep you safe, would kill anyone who tried to take you. There is no limit to what I would do." The conviction in his voice made Betty's skin prickle. This wasn't love. It was obsession. But the intensity frightened her more than outright threats ever could. "That's not romantic," she said. "That's terrifying." "I never claimed to be romantic. Only honest about what you mean to me." Joon-hyuk stood, moving to the terrace railing. His back was to her, shoulders tense beneath his expensive shirt. "My mother killed herself when I was 7. My father was murdered when I was 11. I spent my childhood understanding that everyone I love can be taken away in an instant." Betty's breath caught. He had never spoken about his past before, never offered explanations for the man he had become. "I built my empire by being smarter and more ruthless than anyone else," Joon-hyuk continued, "by eliminating threats before they could eliminate me, by never allowing myself to care about anything enough to be vulnerable." He turned to face her. "Then you walked into my office 6 months ago with your American confidence and your terrible Korean pronunciation, and everything I had built to protect myself became useless. So you trapped me instead of dealing with your feelings like a normal person." "I am not a normal person. I'm a man who has killed to survive, who has built an empire on violence, who understands only possession and control." His hands gripped the railing. "But with you, I wanted to be different. Wanted to be the kind of man who could deserve you. I just did not know how." The confession hung between them, raw and complicated. Betty wanted to stay angry, to hold onto her rage like armor. But she saw the truth in his face, the genuine struggle of a man trying to be something other than what he was. "You could have asked me to stay," she said quietly, "instead of taking away my choice. Would you have?" The question landed heavily. Betty opened her mouth to say yes, then stopped. Would she have stayed if Joon-hyuk had simply asked? Or would she have run back to Los Angeles, convincing herself that 6 months in Seoul had been an adventure, but nothing more? She didn't answer, and that was answer enough. Joon-hyuk's expression shifted into something that might have been sadness. "Exactly. You would have left, and I would have let you go because I thought that was what love meant. Letting people choose their own path. But I was wrong. Sometimes love means fighting to keep what matters, even if the methods are imperfect." "Imperfect," Betty repeated. "That's a generous way to describe reproductive coercion." "I know what I did. I know it was wrong." Joon-hyuk moved closer, his eyes intense in the candlelight. "But I cannot bring myself to regret it when the result is you carrying my child, when the result is a future where you cannot simply disappear from my life." Betty stood, needing distance. She walked to the edge of the terrace, staring at the dark water. What future do you see, Joon-hyuk? Because from where I stand, this looks like a lifetime of imprisonment. It does not have to be. He came up behind her, close but not touching. You could choose to see this differently. As protection, rather than prison. As devotion, rather than control. Those are just prettier words for the same thing. Perhaps. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. Or perhaps they are invitations to find a middle ground, to build something neither of us planned, but both of us could live with. Betty turned to face him, searching his expression for manipulation or deception. She found only complicated sincerity. This man who had stolen her choice was also genuinely trying to offer her something. Not freedom, but not total captivity either. Some impossible balance between the two. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. Don't know how to forgive what you did while also accepting this reality. Then we learn together. Joon-hyuk's hand moved to rest gently on her stomach, where their child grew. For our daughter's sake, if nothing else. You think it's a girl? I hope so. A daughter with your strength and determination. Something soft crossed his face. Though she will probably inherit my stubbornness, which means we are both in trouble. Despite everything, Betty felt her lips twitch toward a smile. The image of a small child with her features and Joon-hyuk's iron will was both terrifying and somehow endearing. The moment stretched between them, almost peaceful. Then Joon-hyuk's phone buzzed, shattering the fragile connection. He pulled it out, his expression shifting as he read the message. What is it? Betty asked. Nothing that concerns you. But his jaw had tightened and his eyes had gone cold. Don't do that. Don't shut me out while claiming you want us to build something together. Joon-hyuk studied her for a long moment. Finally, he said, There has been movement from the Park Syndicate. They are asking questions about you, about whether you return to America or if you are still in Korea. Fear spiked through Betty's chest. How would they even know about me? Because you were seen with me. Because my enemies watch everything I do, looking for weaknesses. His hand tightened on her shoulder. This is why you needed to leave Seoul. Why you are safer here. For how long? How long until they find this place too? They will not find it. The island is registered under shell companies and false names. My security is absolute. But something in his voice suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. That night, Betty lay awake in her bed, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. Her hand rested on her stomach, feeling the slight swell that was becoming more pronounced each day. A baby. A real, living baby that would be born in approximately 6 months. The reality of it finally hit her fully. This wasn't just about her anymore. Whatever decisions she made, whatever risks she took, they would affect an innocent life. Her child would be born into this world of violence and danger, into Joon-hyuk's empire, whether she wanted it or not. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. A sound from the hallway made her tense. Footsteps approaching her door, then stopping just outside. Betty held her breath, wondering if Joon-hyuk was going to enter. The doorknob turned slightly, then stopped. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. Betty released her breath slowly. Even here, in this supposed sanctuary, Joon-hyuk was fighting his own nature, wanting to come to her, but restraining himself, trying to give her space while his instincts screamed at him to possess completely. Maybe that was the best she could hope for. A man at war with himself, trying to be better, even when better felt impossible. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Betty was having breakfast on the terrace when she heard a helicopter approaching. She looked up to see it circling the island before landing on a pad she hadn't noticed on the far side of the property. Joon-hyuk appeared minutes later with 2 people Betty didn't recognize. A man and a woman, both in their 30s, both carrying themselves with the controlled alertness of trained professionals. Betty, this is Jiwoo and Soo-jin, Joon-hyuk said. They will be teaching you self-defense and situational awareness. Betty set down her tea. Why? Because if something happens and my security fails, you need to be able to protect yourself and our child. His expression was serious. I will not always be there to shield you. You need skills of your own. It was the first acknowledgement that his control wasn't absolute, that there were scenarios he couldn't predict or prevent. Betty should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt a new kind of fear. When do we start? She asked. Now, Ji-woo said in accented but clear English, if you are feeling well enough. The training was intense in ways Betty hadn't expected. Ji-woo taught her how to recognize threats, how to position herself in any room to maximize escape routes, how to read body language for hostile intent. Soo-jin focused on physical techniques, how to break holds, where to strike to disable an attacker, how to use everyday objects as weapons. Betty threw herself into the lessons with desperate focus. For the first time since discovering the pregnancy, she felt like she had some agency, some control over her own protection. Joon-hyuk watched most sessions from a distance, his expression unreadable. On the third day, Betty managed to execute a throw that put Soo-jin on the mat. She stood over her instructor, breathing hard, feeling fierce and capable. When she looked up, Joon-hyuk was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin flush. Something had shifted in his eyes. Not just desire, though that was there. Something deeper. Pride, maybe. Or recognition that she was stronger than he had given her credit for. That evening, he came to her room. Not asking permission, just appearing in her doorway as if he had every right. You did well today, he said. Don't sound so surprised. I am not surprised. I always knew you were strong. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. I just did not fully appreciate how beautiful that strength is until I watched you fight. Betty's pulse quickened. Joon-hyuk moved closer, and she felt the air between them charged with something dangerous and electric. This doesn't change anything, she said, but her voice wavered. Does it not? His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. You are learning to protect yourself, becoming even more formidable. How does that not change everything? Because I'm still trapped here. Still. Pregnant with a child I didn't choose to conceive. Still. Joon-hyuk kissed her, swallowing the rest of her protests. Betty knew she should pull away, should maintain the walls between them. Instead, she found herself kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt. The anger and fear and complicated feelings tangled together into something that felt almost like want. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Joon-hyuk rested his forehead against hers. I cannot give you back your choice, he whispered. Cannot undo what I did, but I can try to make this life bearable, can try to be worthy of you, even if I never fully succeed. Betty's eyes burned with unshed tears. I don't know if that's enough. Then tell me what would be. Tell me what you need, and I will move heaven and earth to provide it. I need you to trust me, to stop treating me like something that will break or disappear if you are not constantly controlling every variable. Joon-hyuk pulled back slightly, his jaw working. I do not know how to do that. My entire life has been about maintaining control, or losing everything. Then learn. Betty's hands came up to frame his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. Learn to trust that I will stay not because you trap me, but because I choose to. Learn that real strength is letting go sometimes. She saw him struggling with the concept, his nature warring against her words. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. I will try, he said. I can't promise success, but I will try. It was the best she was going to get. Betty kissed him again, softer this time, and let herself pretend for one moment that they were just two people figuring out how to love each other instead of captor and captive, trying to build something from broken foundations. That night, Joon-hyuk stayed. Not for sex, though the tension between them suggested it was a near thing. He simply held her, his hand resting on her growing belly, feeling their child shift and move beneath his palm. "Tell me about your family," Betty said quietly. "Your real story, not just the tragic highlights." Joon-hyuk was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and careful. He told her about a mother who sang while cooking, who read him stories every night, who worked 3 jobs to try to keep their family afloat. About a father who had been a gentle man broken by debt and desperation. About the loan sharks who came in the night, and the way his father's screams had echoed through their small apartment. He told her about living on the streets, about the syndicate that had recruited him at 14, about the first time he had killed someone, and how he had vomited for hours afterward, about clawing his way up through ranks of men who saw him as disposable, about learning that power was the only reliable protection in a world designed to crush the weak. "I became what I needed to become to survive," he said, "and somewhere along the way I forgot how to be anything else." Betty threaded her fingers through his, feeling the calluses on his palms. "You are more than just survival instincts." "Am I? Sometimes I wonder. Everything I have built, everything I have done, it all comes back to that terrified child watching his father die and swearing he would never be that powerless again. And now I have you, and our child, which means I have new fears, new vulnerabilities." His arm tightened around her, "but also new reasons to be better than what I was." They fell asleep like that, tangled together in complicated intimacy. Betty's last thought before sleep claimed her was that maybe healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something new despite it. The peace shattered 3 days later. Betty was in the library reading when she heard the explosions, 2 massive booms that shook the entire house and sent books tumbling from shelves. She froze, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Then Joon-hyuk was there, moving so fast he seemed to materialize from nowhere. His face was a mask of cold fury, and he had a gun in each hand. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving toward the door. "What's happening?" "The island is under attack. They found us." He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "There is a safe room in the basement. Jiwoo will take you there. Do not leave it for any reason." Jiwoo appeared in the doorway, her own weapon drawn. "This way, Betty. Now." Betty stumbled after her instructor, her heart hammering. Behind them, she could hear gunfire erupting throughout the house, shouts in Korean, breaking glass, the sounds of violence she had thought she left behind in Seoul. They made it to the basement, where Jiwoo pressed her palm to a hidden scanner. A section of wall slid open, revealing a reinforced room with its own air supply, communications equipment, and supplies for weeks. The panic room. "Inside," Jiwoo urged. "I will guard the entrance." "Where's Joon-hyuk?" "Handling the threat. He will come for you when it is safe." Jiwoo's eyes were hard. "But you cannot help him by being exposed. Inside. Now." Betty entered the panic room, and the door sealed behind her with a hydraulic hiss. Suddenly she was alone in the reinforced space, cut off from the chaos above. She sank onto a cot, her hands pressed against her stomach, feeling the baby move inside her. This was the reality Joon-hyuk had tried to protect her from. This was what it meant to be connected to his world. Not just luxury and control, but real violence, real danger that could end lives in seconds. Betty turned on the communication system, searching for any feed that might show her what was happening. She found security camera views of the property, cycling through them until she spotted Joon-hyuk. He moved through the house like death personified, his weapons finding targets with brutal efficiency. She watched him take down 3 men in rapid succession, his face empty of anything resembling mercy. This was the monster she had been afraid to fully see, the killer beneath the careful control. But she also saw the way he positioned himself between the attackers and the route to the basement. Saw him take a bullet to the shoulder without slowing, his focus absolute. He wasn't just fighting. He was protecting her, even at the cost of his own safety. The battle lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, Betty watched Joon-hyuk on the cameras, methodically checking bodies, ensuring every threat was eliminated. Blood soaked his shirt from his wound, but he barely seemed to notice. When he finally came for her, Betty had the door open before he could knock. She stared at him, taking in the blood and gunpowder residue and the cold emptiness in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands moving over her frantically. "The baby? We're fine. You're the one bleeding." Betty grabbed his arm, pulling him into the safe room. The medical supplies were extensive, and she forced him to sit while she examined his shoulder. The bullet had gone through clean, missing bone. Betty cleaned and bandaged it with shaking hands, trying not to think about how close it had come to being fatal. "How did they find us?" she asked. "Betrayal. Someone on my security team sold our location." Joon-hyuk's voice was flat, emotionless. "They have been dealt with." "Dealt with," Betty repeated. "You mean killed?" "I mean they will never betray anyone again." He looked at her with those empty eyes. "This is who I am, Betty. What I have to be to keep you safe. If that horrifies you, I understand, but I will not apologize for it." Betty finished tying off the bandage. Her hands were steady now, even as her mind reeled. "I'm not horrified. No, I'm angry. Angry that we can't seem to find peace anywhere. Angry that our child will be born into this violence. Angry that you were right about the danger." She met his eyes, but not horrified. Not by you doing what was necessary to protect us. Something flickered in Joon-hyuk's expression. Surprise? Maybe. Or relief. He pulled her into his arms, careful of his injured shoulder, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world of chaos. "We cannot stay here," he said against her hair. "The island is compromised. We need to move again." "Where?" "I have other properties, safer ones. But Betty, you need to understand something. These attacks will not stop. My enemies see you as my weakness, and they will keep coming until either they are all dead or I am." Betty pulled back to look at him. "Then what's the solution? We can't run forever. Not with the baby on the way." Joon-hyuk's jaw tightened. "I have been considering options. There is a way to end this permanently, but it would require me to do something I swore I never would." "What?" "Walk away. Transfer control of my organization to my second in command. Liquidate my assets and disappear with you. Start over somewhere my enemies cannot reach." The offer stunned Betty into silence. Joon-hyuk was willing to destroy everything he had built, everything he had become, for her and their child. "Would that even work?" she asked. "Would they let you go?" "If I made the terms clear enough, they would have no choice. I have information that could destroy every major player in Seoul, leverage they cannot ignore." His eyes burned into hers. "I could give you freedom, Betty. Real freedom. A life where you do not spend every moment looking over your shoulder." "At what cost to you?" "Everything." He said it simply, as if the choice was already made. "But I would pay it. For you. For our daughter. For a chance to be something other than what I am." Betty's throat tightened with emotion. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? Freedom, safety, a future not defined by violence. But the cost suddenly felt impossibly high. If you like what's happening, if you want to see how Betty responds to this offer, how they plan their escape, and what shocking truth about her identity changes everything, stay with this story because nothing will be the same after what comes next. "When?" Betty asked. "When would this happen?" "After the baby is born. I need 6 more months to arrange everything properly, to ensure we can truly vanish without leaving traces my enemies could follow. Joon-hyuk's hand came up to cup her face. Can you trust me for 6 more months? Can you believe I will follow through? Betty searched his expression, looking for deception or doubt. She found only grim determination. What happens until then? I move us somewhere safer, somewhere no one can penetrate, and I begin dismantling my empire piece by piece. He kissed her gently. This is my choice, Betty, not made under duress or manipulation. I choose you over everything else. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't another form of control disguised as sacrifice. But 6 months was a long time, and Joon-hyuk's enemies were proving more resourceful than either had anticipated. Okay, she said finally, 6 months. But Joon-hyuk, if this is a lie, if you are manipulating me again, I will find a way to leave. Baby or no baby, I will disappear, and you will never find me. I believe you. He smiled slightly. That fire is why I fell for you in the first place. They left the island that night via helicopter, the house burning behind them to destroy any evidence of their presence. Betty watched the flames consume what had briefly been her prison and felt a strange sense of loss. That island had been where she started accepting her new reality, where she had first felt the baby move, where Joon-hyuk had begun showing her the man beneath the monster. Now it was just ash and smoke disappearing into the night. Their new location was even more remote, a compound in the mountains north of Seoul, built like a fortress with multiple layers of security. The main house was smaller but more defensible, surrounded by guard towers and reinforced walls. This place was designed for exactly this scenario, Joon-hyuk explained as they toured the property. It can withstand a siege for weeks if necessary. Betty looked at the military-grade security and felt her last illusions of normal life crumble. This is insane, living like we are at war. We are at war. That is the reality of my world. He turned to face her, but it is temporary. 6 months, and then we leave all of this behind. Promise me. I promise. Joon-hyuk took her hand, pressing it to his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. On our child's life, I promise you freedom. The next months passed in strange suspension. Betty's pregnancy advanced, her body changing in ways that fascinated and terrified her. The baby grew active, kicking hard enough to wake her at night. Joon-hyuk was there for all of it, his hands constantly seeking her belly, his expression softening whenever he felt their daughter move. He was also systematically dismantling his empire. Betty watched him conduct video conferences in 3 languages, negotiating terms, transferring assets, making arrangements. He worked 18-hour days, driven by some internal deadline only he understood. You are going to burn out, Betty said one night, finding him still in his office at 2 a.m. Joon-hyuk looked up from his laptop, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. I am fine. You are not. You've been awake for 36 hours. She moved behind his chair, her hands settling on his tense shoulders. Come to bed. I need to finish this contract transfer. The Busan operations need to be... They can wait 6 hours. Betty's fingers dug into the knots in his muscles. You are no good to anyone if you collapse. Joon-hyuk leaned back into her touch, his eyes closing. I am so close, Betty. 2 more months, and everything will be in place. 2 more months, and I can give you what you want. What I want right now is for you to take care of yourself. She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. Our daughter needs a father who is alive and functional. That got through to him. Joon-hyuk shut his laptop and let Betty lead him to their shared bedroom. They had been sleeping together for weeks now, the physical proximity bringing a complicated comfort neither wanted to examine too closely. He stripped off his clothes and climbed into bed, pulling Betty against him. His hand found her belly, feeling the baby's movements. She is active tonight, he murmured. She takes after her father, refuses to sleep at reasonable hours. Joon-hyuk's laugh was quiet. Then we are in trouble. Betty snuggled closer, feeling his warmth, his solid presence. Tell me about where we will go. After. Anywhere you want. Europe, South America, New Zealand. Somewhere peaceful where our daughter can grow up without fear. I want a house with a yard. And a dog. I always wanted a dog. Then you will have a house with a yard and a dog. His arms tightened around her. Whatever makes you happy. What about you? What do you want? Joon-hyuk was quiet for a long moment. I want to wake up every morning next to you. Want to watch our daughter learn to walk. Want to be the kind of father mine never got the chance to be. His voice roughened. I want to be just a man, not a criminal or a killer or an empire. Just a man who loves his family. Betty felt tears slide down her cheeks. That sounds perfect. They fell asleep tangled together, dreaming of futures that felt almost possible. The attack came 2 weeks later, in the early morning when guards were changing shifts. Betty woke to explosions and gunfire, Joon-hyuk already moving, already armed, already transforming into the predator she had learned to recognize. Stay in the safe room, he ordered, pulling on his tactical vest. Do not come out until I come for you. But this time, Betty grabbed his arm. Be careful, please. Joon-hyuk paused, his expression softening for just a moment. He kissed her hard and fast. I will come back. I always come back. Then he was gone, and Betty was running for the basement safe room that had become too familiar. She sealed herself inside, her hands pressed protectively over her 7-month pregnant belly, listening to the sounds of war erupting above her. Through the security feeds, she watched Joon-hyuk coordinate his men with military precision. Watched him take down attackers with ruthless efficiency. Watched him take another bullet, this time to the leg, and keep fighting. The battle lasted an hour. When it finally ended, 32 attackers were dead, 7 of Joon-hyuk's men were injured, and the compound was compromised beyond repair. When Joon-hyuk came for her, he was limping badly, blood soaking through his pants. Betty took one look at him and felt something inside her crack. This has to stop, she said. We cannot do this for 2 more months. We will both be dead. Joon-hyuk's jaw tightened. I need more time to arrange everything properly. We do not have more time. They are getting closer with each attack, finding us faster. Betty's voice shook. Our baby is due in 8 weeks. What happens if I go into labor during a firefight? The color drained from Joon-hyuk's face. He clearly had not considered that scenario. I will accelerate the timeline. 1 month. I can have everything ready in 1 month. And where do we go until then? Somewhere they will never think to look. His expression turned calculating. America, Los Angeles, under your father's protection. Betty's blood ran cold. No, absolutely not. Your father runs one of the largest criminal organizations on the West Coast. He has resources I no longer have access to, and my enemies would never expect me to seek refuge with a rival. My father does not know about you, does not know I am pregnant. Betty's hands clenched. I cut contact with him when I took the consulting job in Seoul. Then it is time to reconnect, for our daughter's sake. The idea terrified Betty more than the attacks. Her father, Malcolm Monroe, was not a forgiving man. He had trained her for a life in his organization, only for her to reject it and move to Seoul. Showing up pregnant with a Korean Mafia boss's child would be the ultimate betrayal in his eyes. But Joon-hyuk was right. They needed sanctuary, and her father's territory was the last place his enemies would look. 1 month, Betty said finally. We go to Los Angeles, I face my father, and in 1 month, we disappear forever. 1 month, Joon-hyuk agreed. I promise. They left Korea 2 days later, flying commercial under false identities that Joon-hyuk's people had prepared. Betty wore a wig and oversized clothes to hide her pregnancy. Joon-hyuk looked nothing like his usual polished self in jeans and a baseball cap. A tourist, rather than a crime lord. The flight to Los Angeles felt surreal. Betty stared out the window as Korea disappeared beneath clouds, wondering if she would ever see it again. Beside her, Joon-hyuk's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "We are going to make it," he said quietly. "I swear to you, we are going to make it." Betty wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But as the plane carried them toward her father's territory and an uncertain future, she could not shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Los Angeles in December was nothing like Seoul. The weather was mild, palm trees swaying in a breeze that smelled like ocean and exhaust. Betty breathed it in, feeling a complicated mix of homecoming and dread. They took a taxi to a hotel in Santa Monica, checking in under their false names. The room was modest by Joon-hyuk's standards, but it was clean and anonymous. Exactly what they needed. "Call your father," Joon-hyuk said once they were settled. "Arrange a meeting." Betty stared at the phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over her father's contact. She had not spoken to Malcolm Monroe in 8 months, had not told him about the pregnancy or Joon-hyuk or any of it. This conversation was going to be a disaster. She pressed call before she could lose her nerve. Her father answered on the second ring. "Betty?" His voice was sharp with surprise. "Where the hell have you been?" "Los Angeles. I need to see you. Today, if possible." "Are you in trouble?" "It is complicated." "Can we meet?" There was a pause. "My office. 2 hours. And Betty, you better have a damn good explanation for disappearing." The line went dead. Betty set down the phone, her hands shaking. "He will be angry," she said to Joon-hyuk. "Really angry." "Then I will handle his anger." Joon-hyuk's expression was calm. "You focus on staying safe. That is all that matters." 2 hours later, they stood in front of her father's import-export business, which everyone knew was a front for his criminal operations. The building was nondescript, industrial, surrounded by warehouses and shipping containers. Betty's heart hammered as they entered. Security guards recognized her immediately, their eyebrows raising at her visible pregnancy and the dangerous-looking man at her side. They were waved through without comment. Malcolm Monroe's office was on the top floor, all windows overlooking the port. He stood when they entered, his eyes moving from Betty to Joon-hyuk to Betty's pregnant belly. "Well," he said finally, "this is not what I expected." "Dad, this is Kang Joon-hyuk. I know who he is." Malcolm's voice went cold. "I know exactly who he is. The question is what he is doing in my city with my pregnant daughter." Joon-hyuk stepped forward, his posture respectful but not submissive. "I came to ask for your protection, temporarily. My enemies have found us repeatedly in Korea. We need sanctuary while I finalize arrangements for our permanent disappearance." "And why would I help the man who clearly got my daughter pregnant and dragged her into his world?" "Because I love her. Because I am willing to walk away from everything to give her and our child a safe life. Because your grandson deserves better than to be born into a war zone." "Granddaughter," Betty corrected quietly. "We are having a girl." Malcolm's expression shifted, something complicated crossing his face. He looked at Betty, really looked at her, and she saw him taking in the changes. The way she stood closer to Joon-hyuk, the protective way his hand rested on her lower back, the visible connection between them. "Sit down," Malcolm said finally, "both of you, and start from the beginning. I want to hear everything." They talked for 3 hours. Betty explained how she had met Joon-hyuk, how their relationship had developed, how he had trapped her with the pregnancy. She did not hide the truth, did not try to make it sound better than it was. Joon-hyuk explained his empire, his enemies, his plans to walk away. He was brutally honest about his past, about the violence he had committed, about why Betty's father should not trust him. "But I am asking anyway," Joon-hyuk finished. "1 month of sanctuary. That is all I need. Then we disappear and you will never hear from us again." Malcolm was silent for a long time, his fingers steepled under his chin. Finally, he looked at Betty. "Is this what you want? This life with him?" Betty took a breath. "It is not what I would have chosen initially. But yes, I want to build a life with him. Want our daughter to know her father. Want to see if we can make something good out of all this mess. And if he is lying, if this is just another manipulation, then I will leave, and I will never forgive myself for being wrong." She met her father's eyes. "But I do not think I am wrong. I think he really does love us, in his own complicated, fucked up way." Malcolm's laugh was bitter. "Love? Everyone thinks they invented it." He stood, moving to the window. "1 month. You can stay in the safe house in Malibu. But Joon-hyuk, if you hurt my daughter or my granddaughter, there is nowhere on earth you can hide from me." "Understood," Joon-hyuk said simply. "And Betty, when this is over, you call me. Let me know you are safe. Let me be part of my granddaughter's life, even if it has to be from a distance." Betty felt tears prick her eyes. "I will. I promise." Her father nodded once, then pulled out his phone to make arrangements. As he talked, Joon-hyuk's hand found Betty's, squeezing gently. "1 month," he whispered. "Then freedom." Betty leaned against him, feeling exhausted and hopeful in equal measure. 1 month. They just had to survive 1 more month. The safe house in Malibu was beautiful, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. It had bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and security systems that would make Fort Knox jealous. But it also had a yard and natural light and the sound of waves instead of gunfire. Betty felt some of the tension leave her body for the first time in months. They settled into a routine. Joon-hyuk worked constantly from the house's secure office, finalizing his arrangements. Betty nested, preparing for the baby's arrival. Her father visited twice a week, bringing supplies and slowly warming to Joon-hyuk, despite his obvious reservations. "He is not what I expected," Malcolm admitted one afternoon while Joon-hyuk was on a call. "I thought he would be arrogant, dismissive, but he actually seems to care about you." "He does," Betty said, "in his own intense way. That intensity worries me. Me too sometimes, but it also makes me feel safe, like nothing could hurt me while he's around." Malcolm studied his daughter's face. "You love him?" It was not a question, but Betty answered anyway. "Yes, I do. Even knowing everything I know, I love him. Then I hope to God he deserves it." The baby came 3 weeks later, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Betty's water broke at 4 in the morning, and suddenly everything was chaos. Joon-hyuk was in full crisis mode, grabbing the hospital bag, calling her father, coordinating with his security team. "Breathe," Betty told him between contractions. "I am the one in labor. You need to calm down." "I am calm. You are panicking." "I am strategically concerned." But his hands shook as he helped her into the car. The birth lasted 14 hours, long and difficult and ultimately successful. When they placed the baby in Betty's arms, she stared down at a tiny face that was somehow both familiar and completely new. "She is perfect," Joon-hyuk whispered, his voice breaking. Tears streamed down his face as he touched their daughter's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Betty asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter, Betty knew exactly what felt right. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Joon-hyuk's expression crumbled completely. He bent to kiss Betty's forehead, then Hope's. "Hope, yes. She is our hope for something better." Malcolm arrived an hour later, staring at his granddaughter with wonder. "She has your mother's eyes," he said to Betty, his own voice rough with emotion. The next 3 days in the hospital felt like a bubble outside of time. Betty recovered while Joon-hyuk barely left her side. He held Hope for hours, staring at her like she was the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. And maybe she was. On the 4th day, Joon-hyuk's phone rang. He answered it, then went very still. Betty watched his expression shift from soft contentment to cold fury in seconds. "What is it?" she asked when he hung up. "The park syndicate knows we are in Los Angeles. They are moving people into the city." His jaw clenched. "We need to leave. Today." "The doctor said I should not travel for at least a week." "I know. But staying here is too dangerous." Joon-hyuk was already texting, making arrangements. "I have a private doctor who can accompany us. We leave tonight." Betty looked down at Hope sleeping in her arms, so tiny and vulnerable. The thought of running again, of dragging their newborn daughter through airports and safe houses, made her want to weep. "Where are we going?" "New Zealand. I have a property there under a name no one knows. We can disappear completely." He moved to the bed, his hand gentle on Hope's head. "This is the last move, Betty. I swear. After this, we are done running." Betty wanted to believe him. She had to believe him, because the alternative was spending the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. "Okay," she said quietly. "New Zealand. Let us go be free." That night, under cover of darkness, they left the hospital through a service entrance. Malcolm was there to see them off, his expression grim but resigned. "You call me," he ordered Betty. "Once a month. Let me know you are all alive." "I will." Betty hugged her father hard, Hope cradled carefully between them. "Thank you for everything." "Take care of my girls," Malcolm said to Joon-hyuk, "or I will hunt you down." "You will never need to," Joon-hyuk promised. "I would die before letting anything happen to them." The men shook hands, some understanding passing between them. Then Betty was being ushered into a waiting car, Hope secure in a carrier beside her, Joon-hyuk on her other side. As they drove to the private airfield, Betty looked out at Los Angeles disappearing behind them. Her city, her home. Maybe someday she could return, but for now, they needed distance. The flight to New Zealand took 16 hours. Hope was surprisingly good, sleeping for most of it. Betty dozed against Joon-hyuk's shoulder while he stayed awake and vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning for threats that did not exist on the plane. "You can relax," Betty murmured. "We are safe. I will relax when we land, when you and Hope are secured in the new house, when I know for certain no one has followed us." His arm tightened around her. "Until then, I watch." Betty did not have the energy to argue. She closed her eyes and let herself drift, trusting him to keep them safe. They landed in Auckland as dawn broke across the Pacific. A car was waiting to take them north to a coastal property Joon-hyuk owned through layers of shell companies. The drive took 3 hours, winding through green hills and sheep farms, so far removed from Seoul or Los Angeles that it felt like a different planet. The house appeared at the end of a long driveway, modern and sprawling, surrounded by native forest with glimpses of ocean through the trees. Remote, but not isolated. Perfect. "Welcome home," Joon-hyuk said quietly. Betty looked at the house that would be their sanctuary and felt something release in her chest. Home. After months of running, of temporary stops and constant fear, they finally had a home. Over the next weeks, they settled in. Joon-hyuk finished liquidating his remaining assets, transferring the last of his empire to his second in command. He burned bridges methodically, making it clear to everyone in his former world that Kang Joon-hyuk was dead. The man who existed now was just a father, a partner, trying to build a peaceful life. Betty watched him transform. Slowly, carefully, the cold predator receded, replaced by someone softer. He learned to change diapers, to soothe Hope when she cried, to cook simple meals and wash dishes and do all the mundane tasks that made up a normal life. He was not always successful. Sometimes she would catch him staring out the windows, his posture rigid, scanning for threats. Sometimes he woke from nightmares covered in sweat, reaching for weapons that were no longer under the bed. The violence was still in him, would always be in him. But he was trying. Every day, he was trying to be better. One evening, 3 months after their arrival in New Zealand, Betty found Joon-hyuk on the back deck watching the sunset. Hope was asleep in her bassinet nearby, making small noises in her sleep. "What are you thinking about?" Betty asked, settling into the chair beside him. "That I never believed this was possible. This peace, this normalcy." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "I spent my entire adult life convinced I was too damaged, too violent, too far gone to ever have something like this. And now I have everything. A daughter who looks at me like I am her entire world. A partner who saw past the monster to the man underneath. A life that does not require constant violence." He brought her hand to his lips. "You gave me this, Betty. You and Hope. You saved me." Betty felt tears prick her eyes. "We saved each other. I was lost too, you know. Running from my father's world, from expectations, from the person everyone wanted me to be. You let me figure out who I actually am." "Who are you?" Joon-hyuk asked quietly. "Someone stronger than I thought. Someone capable of loving a complicated man. Someone building a future instead of hiding from the past." She smiled. "A mother, a partner, maybe someday a wife." "If you ever get around to asking properly." Joon-hyuk went very still. "Is that what you want? Marriage? Someday, when we are ready, when it feels right." Betty squeezed his hand. "No rush. We have the rest of our lives." "The rest of our lives," Joon-hyuk repeated, as if testing the phrase. "I like the sound of that." They sat together as the sun set over the Pacific, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them. The past still existed, would always exist in the scars they both carried, but the future stretched ahead, full of possibility and second chances. Betty thought about the terrified woman who had stared at a pregnancy test in Seoul, who had felt trapped and powerless and lost. That woman felt like a lifetime ago. She had been forged into someone new through fire and fear and impossible choices. And maybe that was okay. Maybe transformation was always painful. Maybe the best lives were built not despite trauma, but because of how you chose to respond to it. "I love you," she said to Joon-hyuk. Simple, true, complicated in all the best ways. "I love you too," he replied, "more than I have the words to express." Hope stirred, making a small sound. They both looked at her, this tiny person they had created, who represented every choice they had made and every hope they held for the future. "She is going to be so loved," Betty whispered. "She already is," Joon-hyuk said, "more than anything in this world." And in that moment, watching the last light fade from the sky, Betty finally believed they had made it, had survived the violence and the fear and the impossible odds. They were free. They were safe. They were home. The story could have ended there, a peaceful conclusion to a chaotic journey. But life was never that simple. The past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. 6 months into their new life, Joon-hyuk's phone rang. He stared at the unknown number, his expression darkening. Betty watched from across the room, hope on her hip, feeling dread settle in her stomach. "Do not answer it," she said. But Joon-hyuk was already pressing accept. He listened for a moment, his face going carefully blank. When he spoke, it was in Korean, his voice cold and hard, the killer surfacing again. He hung up and was silent for a long moment. "Who was that?" Betty asked, though she already knew the answer would not be good. My former second in command, the one I left in charge of the Seoul operations. Joon-hyuk's jaw clenched. He is dead. Assassinated 3 days ago. And the new leadership is looking for me. Betty's blood ran cold. Why? Because I know too much. Because my silence was contingent on certain agreements that are no longer being honored. Because walking away from that world is never truly final. He looked at her with anguished eyes. We need to move again. No. Betty's voice came out stronger than she felt. No more running. We have a 6-month-old daughter. We have built a life here. I refuse to spend the rest of our existence fleeing from shadows. Betty, you do not understand. Then make me understand. Explain to me why, after everything we have been through, we still are not safe. Joon-hyuk ran his hands through his hair, frustration and fear warring in his expression. Because I was foolish enough to believe that information and threats would be enough to keep them away. Because I underestimated how much some people hate leaving loose ends. Because the world I came from does not forgive or forget. So what do? I handle it. I go back to Seoul. I deal with the new leadership, and I make it clear that I am permanently out. That touching me or my family would result in consequences they cannot afford. You go alone? Betty's voice rose. You leave me and Hope here while you walk back into danger? It is safer this way. If they know where you are, they could use you against me. They already know where we are if they found your phone number. Betty moved closer, shifting Hope to her other hip. We do this together. As a family. That is what you promised. Joon-hyuk looked torn. I cannot risk you. And I cannot watch you leave not knowing if you will come back. Betty's free hand gripped his arm. We are partners, remember? That means we face threats together. For a long moment, Joon-hyuk just stared at her. Then he pulled both her and Hope into his arms, holding them tight. All right, he said quietly. Together. But we do it my way. With my planning and my precautions. Agreed. They left for Seoul 3 days later, Hope in Betty's arms, both women protected by layers of security that would make presidents jealous. Joon-hyuk was taking no chances. The flight was tense. Joon-hyuk made call after call, coordinating with people Betty did not know, arranging meetings with former colleagues and current enemies. By the time they landed in Seoul, Betty was exhausted and terrified. They did not go to a hotel. Instead, Joon-hyuk took them to a private facility owned by one of the few people he still trusted. They were ushered into a secure apartment, comfortable but clearly designed for protection rather than luxury. What happens now? Betty asked once they were settled. Now I meet with the new leadership. I remind them why leaving me alone is in their best interest. And I make it clear that if anything happens to my family, I will burn their entire organization to the ground. Joon-hyuk's eyes were hard. They will understand. Men like this always understand threats. And if they do not, then I do what I do best. I eliminate the problem permanently. The meeting was set for the next evening. Joon-hyuk dressed in a suit Betty had not seen before. All black, expensive, intimidating. He looked every inch the crime lord he had been, and it frightened her how easily he slipped back into that skin. Be careful, she said, straightening his tie, even though it did not need straightening. Always. He kissed her, then kissed Hope's forehead. I am not back in 3 hours. Take Hope and run. There is a car waiting in the underground garage. Drive to the airport and use the tickets under the names I gave you. Do not wait for me. Joon-hyuk, promise me, Betty. Promise you will save yourself and our daughter if this goes wrong. Betty wanted to refuse, wanted to insist they would all make it out together. But she saw the desperate fear in his eyes and knew he needed this promise to walk into that meeting. I promise, she whispered. He nodded once, then was gone. The next 3 hours were the longest of Betty's life. She paced the apartment with Hope, trying to stay calm, trying not to imagine all the ways this could end badly. At the 2-hour mark, she started to prepare to run. At 2 hours and 40 minutes, she was putting Hope in her carrier, ready to leave. Then the door opened, and Joon-hyuk walked in. He was bloody and bruised, his knuckles split, his lip bleeding. But he was alive and walking and mostly functional. "It is done," he said, his voice rough. "We can go home." Betty rushed to him, careful of Hope between them. "What happened?" "They tested me, wanted to see if I still had the edge. I convinced them I do." Joon-hyuk's smile was grim. "And I made it very clear that my family is untouchable. That message will spread. No one will come for you or Hope. Not now. Not ever." "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be in this world." He touched Hope's sleeping face with gentle fingers. "We go back to New Zealand. We live our lives. And if anyone is stupid enough to test me again, I will remind them why they should not have." They left Seoul the next morning, all three of them exhausted but alive. As the plane lifted off, Betty looked down at the city that had been both her prison and her transformation. She would never see it the same way again. "No more running?" she asked Joon-hyuk. "No more running," he confirmed. "We are free, Betty. Finally, permanently free." And this time, she believed him. They returned to New Zealand and settled back into their life. Months passed without incident. Hope grew, becoming more active and alert. She started smiling, then laughing, then trying to roll over. Every milestone felt like a small miracle. Joon-hyuk relaxed by degrees. The constant vigilance faded, replaced by genuine peace. He learned to play with Hope, to make her laugh, to be present rather than constantly planning for threats. Betty watched him transform fully into the man she had always hoped he could be. Not perfect, never that. The violence would always be part of him, but controlled, directed, used only when absolutely necessary. 1 year after arriving in New Zealand, Betty woke to find Joon-hyuk sitting in Hope's room, holding their sleeping daughter, tears streaming down his face. "What is wrong?" Betty whispered from the doorway. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." Joon-hyuk looked up at her, his expression raw with emotion. "I never thought I could have this. Family, peace, love. I spent my whole life believing I was too broken, too violent, too far gone. And now I know I was wrong. That with the right person, anyone can change. That love is not about being perfect. It is about choosing each other every day despite the imperfections." He stood carefully, laying Hope back in her crib. Then he turned to Betty and dropped to one knee. Betty's breath caught. "I know I did this all wrong from the start," Joon-hyuk said quietly. "I trapped you, took away your choice, built our foundation on control rather than consent. But Betty Monroe, I am asking now, properly, will you marry me? Will you choose to build this life with me, not because circumstances forced you, but because you want to?" Betty's eyes filled with tears. This was the question she'd been waiting for. The moment when she could truly choose him, freely and without coercion. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I choose you. I choose us. I choose this complicated, messy, beautiful life we have built." Joon-hyuk surged to his feet and kissed her, deep and desperate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing. "I love you," he whispered, "more than I knew it was possible to love another person. I love you too, even with all the baggage and trauma and complicated history. Especially because of those things. They made us who we are." They married quietly 3 months later, just the three of them on a beach at sunset. No family, no guests, just them making promises to each other while Hope babbled happily in Betty's arms. It was perfect in its simplicity. The years that followed were not without challenges. Joon-hyuk still had nightmares sometimes. Betty still struggled with the trauma of being trapped and controlled. They went to therapy, both individual and couples, working through layers of damage, but they did the work together. Hope grew into a bright, fierce child with Betty's determination and Joon-hyuk's intensity. She knew nothing of her father's past, only that he loved her completely and would do anything to protect her. When she was 5, they had a second child, a son this time, whom they named after Joon-hyuk's father. The healing that represented brought Joon-hyuk to his knees. Betty's father visited once a year, maintaining a relationship with his grandchildren while respecting the distance they needed. The wounds there healed slowly but steadily, and Joon-hyuk kept his promise. They never ran again, never had to. The past stayed in the past, and they built a future that was entirely their own. 10 years after that terrifying pregnancy test in Seoul, Betty stood on their deck watching the sunset. Hope was inside practicing piano, while her little brother crashed toy cars together. Joon-hyuk came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I would not change anything, even the hard parts, even the fear and the pain and the impossible choices." Betty leaned back against him. "It all led us here. Do you ever regret staying? Wonder what your life would have been if you had gotten on that plane to Los Angeles?" Betty turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had stolen her choice and then spent a decade earning it back. "Not even for a second. This life, this family, you, it is everything I never knew I needed." "I do not deserve you," Joon-hyuk said quietly. "Probably not. But you are stuck with me anyway." He laughed and kissed her, and Betty thought about how far they had come. From captor and captive to partners, from control and possession to love and choice, from broken people to a family that somehow worked despite everything. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and born from darkness. But it was theirs, and that made it beautiful. As the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Betty held onto her husband and felt grateful for every impossible moment that had led them here. To freedom, to family, to love that had been forged in fire and somehow emerged stronger for it. This was home. This was peace. This was everything. And it was enough.